when I was thinking about it, it's kind of like a blast from the past. Okay, I don't know if you remember the Temptations had a hit back in the early '70s, and this is like in this like 1970, I think it's when this song came out, and they were singing back then that this world that we're in is one big ball of confusion. Um, and you know something? It's only gotten worse. It's only gotten worse. They don't even have to update this song. If you go back and read the lyrics to this song, it's like everything they talked about back then is going on today and more and more. So it's something that we need to keep in mind, especially when you consider what we're going to be looking at tonight from the book of Revelation. Um, we are talking about the Olivet Discourse, and we are, of course, looking at Matthew 24 and 25. And I've been debating all week whether to mention this tonight or to wait until next week. But we're probably only going to have one, maybe two more classes. And then Wayne's going to take his class back. He's not here tonight to defend that, but, I guess, go, fighting and screaming, but I'll give him his class back, No, it's time for him to take the class. And so the way that I'm going through this, come on, folks, there's no way we're going to get through 2 chapters, let alone, 2 verses in the way that I'm teaching. So the next 2 weeks will be the final time that I'll be teaching at this point. And I'll talk a little bit more about that next week when we kind of start wrapping things up. So just to kind of give you a heads up, I don't want to rush through the Olivet Discourse. I've been really convicted that it's way too important to try and rush through. And, it was kind of silly in my part to think that I could even do it. So anyways, a lot of the slides we're going to look at to begin with are probably in that handout of yours. We talked about context multiple times over the last several weeks. And just keep in mind that the Olivet Discourse here in Matthew 24 and 25 appears also in Luke's Gospel and in Mark's Gospel in a condensed version. Okay, Matthew takes 2 chapters, and if you pull in the end of chapter 23, it's over 2 chapters in length. So Mark and Luke do an admirable job of condensing it down to just 1 chapter. And of course, I've already mentioned that John has nothing to say about this, but then of course he's going to write the book of Revelation. So I guess he got back at those other 3 writers, right? We started off looking at the end of Matthew 23. And these are the verses that we looked at, and we spent some time talking about these. Christ is about to walk out of the temple area for the last time, and these are the last words he says as he's exiting the temple. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather you. That's gathering. That's I mentioned this last time. The Greek word is episynago, and that's where we get the word synagogue from. How often I wanted to gather your children together, the way a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were unwilling. Behold, your house, that's the temple that Christ is speaking about, your house is being left to you desolate. For I say to you, from now on, you will not see me until you say, and he's speaking to Israel here, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And that won't take place. Here's some insight. That won't take place until the very end of the tribulation. Then they'll say it, because all of Israel at that point will be saved, and we'll get to that as we move through this. From the temple, they Christ, the disciples move up the Mount of Olives, and it's from the Mount of Olives that he's going to answer the questions that are up on the screen. When will these things be? When will these things be? And I think that question is specifically geared to. Now you have to. I know I'm looking at verse 3 because we've already covered this, but in verses 1 and 2, the disciples are pointing out the spectacular temple, and Christ says it's all going to come down. It's all going to come down. And so their first question is, well, when's this going to happen? When will these things? When will these things be? And then the other question they ask is, what will be the sign of your coming and end of the age? It's a combined question. Some commentators break this into 3 questions. I see it more as 2 questions because Christ does not answer question number 1 in Matthew's gospel. Okay, and you just need to keep that in mind. If you start looking in Matthew's gospel for the answer to what about the temple coming down, you're not going to find it, or you're going to have to, do some allegory interpretation to try and figure that out. Luke is the one that will record Christ's answer. Now, why the Lord does this, I don't know. That's a question that we can ask him when we see him face to face. Why isn't it all together? But it's not. It's not. Luke records his answer about the temple, and you can read that in Luke 21. The other questions about the sign of your coming and end of the age, Matthew and Mark are going to answer. So this is a good, I think a good quote from Dr. John Walvoord, who's now with the Lord. But this makes a whole lot of sense. This won't be in your handout because I just added this week. He says both the questions of the disciples and the answers of Christ are therefore key to the Jewish expectation based on Old Testament prophecy and the program of God for the earth in general, rather than the church as the body of Christ. Okay, and I believe that also. I know there's different interpretations of Matthew 24 and 25. I do not see the church in Matthew 24 and 25. I know a lot of expositors fit in there one place or another, or they kind of, piece it through somehow. I don't see it, and I think I can defend that from what Christ is going to say in the chapter. I think contextually, the church is not there. Okay? The other thing that we brought up, and this is all just a point of review, is that the disciples are merging all 3 of these questions into one action. They want to know, they think it's all going to happen at the same time. And it's not. It's not. Mark and Luke, as I've already said, we're going to deal with that. But Luke, and Luke's going to answer the first question. But the disciples, I believe, are looking at this as one action. It's all going to take place at the same time. And Christ has to kind of say, that's not necessarily the case, guys. Okay? Matthew 24 breaks down like this, and I think this was in your handout. This slide and the next slide are in your handout. But I've tried to break this down into the first half of the tribulation, first 3.5 years, and the second half of the tribulation, the second 3.5 years. You can see right in the center is the Abomination of Desolation. That's when the Antichrist will take his seat in the temple and proclaim himself not just to be the ruler, but to be God himself. And, by that point in the tribulation, besides everything else that's going on, the nation of Israel is just going to beat feet. Okay? But we'll see that. We'll see that in whenever we get to that section, which probably won't be anytime soon. Okay? this is where we're going to spend most of our time tonight. We're going to be in Matthew 24, the first, actually verses 4 through 14. And then we're going to be over in Revelation chapter 6, because we're going to be looking at the sealed judgments, okay? And right up front, I got to say that there's a lot that could be said about the sealed judgments, but this isn't a class on Revelation. This is a class on the Olivet Discourse. And even though Matthew 24 and Revelation 6 mesh so well together, and you'll see that as we go through this, we're not going to spend too much time in Revelation except just to read the passage and see how it applies to Matthew 24. Okay, is that everyone with me on that? Okay. One of the things to keep in mind, and I'll probably say this over and over, is verse 8. Look in Matthew 24, verse 8. And Christ says this, that these things are merely the beginning of birth pangs. Now, he's already gone through verses 4, 5, 6, and 7, which we're going to be going through here shortly. But in verse 8, he says, everything that I'm talking about is like birth pangs. In the New King James, and I think the King James also, they say it's the beginning of sorrows, is the way they put it. Well, the actual Greek word really means childbirth. It means birthing pains, and so the way that a lot of the newer translations put that as birth pains or birth pangs, I think is better. I also believe that Christ is making reference here to the passage over in Jeremiah chapter 30, verses 6 and 7, talking about the first half of the tribulation that will be known as a time of sorrow and a time of pain. Okay? This is the verses from Jeremiah. I'll go ahead and read them, and then we'll move on. Jeremiah writes, ask now and see if a male or a man can give birth. That's politically incorrect, I guess, in today's society, since we can't even determine what the definition of a woman, is that what it is? Of a woman is. So, and besides that, you're no longer a mother, you're a birthing unit or something like that. It's getting nutso out there, isn't it? Anyways, I digress, which is so easy to do. Why do I see every man with his hands on his loins as a woman in childbirth? And why have all faces turned pale? Alas, for that day is great. There is none like it. And it is the time of Jacob's distress, or as the New King James puts it, which I like more, it's the time of Jacob's trouble. But he, that's Jacob, and Jacob represents Israel, he's going to be delivered from it. He's going to be delivered from it. Okay? So I think that's what Christ is talking about when he talks about birth pangs there in verse 8, is that this is just the start. Now, I mentioned this last time we were together, there's a lot of ladies in here, and and I know that there's nothing pleasant about childbirth except after it's over, right? But before the baby comes, there's those pains, and not a pleasant experience from what I understand. I have no inside knowledge of that, but I know my wife was beating me to death on our way down to the hospital, saying, faster, faster. That was interesting. This happened in Phoenix, by the way, and we had a long ways to go to get to the hospital. But anyways, another story for another time. Anyways, this is the time of Jacob's trouble. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. And Christ is saying, it's just the start. It's just the start, because the first part of Matthew 24 is going to deal with the first half of the tribulation. So let's go to Matthew 24, let's go to Matthew 24. And we've already gone, I think, through, let's see, let me get the Bible here. We've already gone through verses 1 through 3 last time we were together, so I want to pick up in verse 4. And when the verses come up on the screen, I'm going to ask if someone out there will, it's usually just 1 or 2 verses at a time. So if I get someone to read verses 4 and 5 from Matthew 24, appreciate that.
Jesus answered, "Watch out that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, claiming I am the Christ, and will deceive many."
Okay, so Christ is telling us that there's many that are going to come in his name and proclaim that they're the Christ. It's an interesting fact, and this is a historical fact, that from the time of Christ, which is around 30 AD, until the early 130s AD, that's 100 years or so, there were really no false Christs that appeared in Israel. Now, this was fascinating for me to find out, okay? There were some false prophets that came on the scene, but there weren't any, as I said in my note here, there weren't any messianic figures that burst onto the scene to proclaim themselves the Messiah of Israel. It just didn't happen. And you say, well, okay, is that a big deal? Or yeah, it is a big deal, because you have to remember, think back a long time ago when we started our class. I explained that there were at least 4 different ways that people interpret Scripture. One of them is known as preterism. Preterism is the belief that everything we're reading here in chapter 24 and 25 of Matthew, everything we will read in Revelation took place in 70 AD or prior to it or shortly thereafter. It's all water under the bridge for them. And that's how a preterist looks at these prophecies. They do not see them as future. Now, I've mentioned before, I am a futurist. I come from a futurist interpretation of Scripture, which means when I look at Matthew 24 and 25, I see it as future. Okay, I see it as future. I see Revelation as future. Okay, now preterists don't, and because of that, sometimes information like this is important, because preterists say that, well, everything was fulfilled in 70 AD. Well, how can that be when there were no Christ, no Messiahs that came into Israel until well after the temple was destroyed and Israel was scattered? Okay, just so you know who they are. We're talking about R.C. Sproul, a big preterist, Hank Hanegraaff. A very big preterist. Kenneth Gentry and Gary DeMar, they're 2 fellows that are writing nowadays about the interpretation of Matthew 24 and 25. And I mention them because, I've learned a lot from R.C. Sproul over the years, and I've learned a lot from Hank Hanegraaff over the years. But when it comes to end-time prophecy, boy, I'm sorry, but they're way off. They really are. They look at it as it's all been fulfilled. Well, then what do we do with all this? Well, this is just something for us to live our lives for today, and we should be aware that there may be false messiahs coming in. It's amazing the ideas they have about these chapters. But anyway, so keep that in mind, that it's just something to tuck away as a note somewhere, that there were no messianic figures that came into Israel until after 130 AD. Okay, so Christ is speaking about here in verses 4 and 5 that no one misleads you, for many are going to come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and they're going to mislead many. What happened to my clicker? It stopped clicking. Well, when all else fails, that's why they invented the space bar. Thank you, Lord. Okay. We're going to look at the first seal right now. The first seal of, now we're going to look at what are commonly called the four horsemen of what?
Apocalypse.
The apocalypse, okay? The four horsemen of the apocalypse. And we're going to start with seal number 1 in Revelation chapter 6. And we're going to look at verses 1 and 2. So hold your place here in Matthew. Now remember what he just said in verses 4 and 5, that there are false Christs that are going to come on the scene and all. And now over in Revelation chapter 6, someone read for me verses 1 and 2. And everyone listen carefully to these verses as you follow along.
Now I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures saying with a voice like thunder, "Come and see." And I looked, and behold, a white horse. He who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer.
Okay, this is the first horseman that's revealed. And who is the one that reveals the first horseman? Said the teacher to the class. It's Christ. Christ is the one who will break the seal. Okay, you need to see this. You need to see this in verse 1, that Christ is the one that will break the first seal, and that first seal is going to bring onto the scene the Antichrist. The Antichrist is going to come onto the scene in the first seal. He's a rider on a white horse. That usually represents peace. That usually represents peace, and it is peace. Notice that the rider carries a bow, but he carries no arrows. Why? Because he's pursuing peace. And what peace is he going to pursue? Well, Israel at this point in time is going to be basically isolated from the world and under attack. And the Antichrist, and again, we don't want to get too far into this, but the Antichrist is going to come on the scene, and basically he's going to bring peace among the nations. Now, this is a peace that's going to last, but it's a peace that he signs, Israel will sign with this Antichrist individual. And that is when the 7-year tribulation clock starts, is when Israel signs this peace agreement. I've mentioned that multiple times over the many weeks that we've been looking at this, and we need to keep that in mind. Over in Daniel chapter 12, actually I have 12:27, and I think it's supposed to be 9:27, because that's the that's the verse that I have. Okay. This is Daniel 9:27, and notice what Daniel writes to us. He says, "And he," that's the Antichrist. Now we looked at Daniel 9 in context, and so I don't want you to think I'm just kind of like throwing this up there out of its. We studied this, so we're talking about the Antichrist. He's going to make a firm covenant with the many, and the many is Israel. The many is Israel. From the context, it's Israel for 1 week. Now, you got to remember, this is the 70 weeks of Daniel. So one of those weeks equals 7 years. Okay? One of those weeks equals 7 years. But in the middle of the week, he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. So in the middle of that 7th week, okay, 7 years. In the middle of that 7 years, so it goes what? 3.5 years? That's the middle. He's going to put an end to sacrifices. And why would he do that? Well, there's no reason to sacrifice to an unseen God when God is here in the temple. in the guise of the Antichrist. So that's why we have the stoppage of sacrifices in the temple, because the Antichrist is seated there. Over in Isaiah chapter 28, verses 15 and verses 18 say this: because you have said, we have made a covenant with death, and with Sheol we have made a pact. The overwhelming scourge will not reach us when it passes by, for we have made falsehood our refuge, and we have concealed ourselves with deception. This is Israel speaking. And the Lord says, this is the Lord speaking in verse 18, your covenant with death will be canceled, and your pact with Sheol will not stand. When the overwhelming scourge passes through, then you become its trampling place. So in Daniel chapter 9 and in Isaiah chapter 28, we're told of a pact that's going to be signed with this Antichrist, with this, and here I like the way it's done here in Isaiah 28, that it's a pact with death, a covenant with death, a pact with Sheol. So that's what the Antichrist brings. He comes on the scene as someone bringing peace, and let's, I don't know if give credit where credit is due is the right term, but he will bring peace. He will bring peace between Israel and the nations. The problem is that's just the start of the tribulation. During those next 3+ years, there's going to be all sorts of things happening that we're going to be looking at. We have 3 more riders to look at that are going to be coming on the heels of this white horse. Okay? That's going to be happening. And what's going to be coming after this? Well, verses 6 and 7 say that there's going to be wars. There's going to be rumors of wars, nations against nations, kingdom against kingdom, famines and earthquakes. This is all the first half of the tribulation. This is all the first half of the tribulation. So, Matthew, go back to Matthew chapter 6. Yeah. If you go back to Matthew chapter 6, you'll be in the Sermon on the Mount, which might be a lot more pleasant to listen to than this. But Matthew 24, someone read verses 6 and 7 if they would, please.
You will hear. You will hear. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places.
Okay. You're going to hear of all these things taking place. See that, verse 6, see that you are not frightened. This word frightened is kind of interesting. Literally, that word, remember, Christ is speaking to the disciples, and from the way I'm coming from, as far as my interpretation, the disciples are representing the nation of Israel at this point. Okay, it's basically being scared out of your wits. You ever been scared out of your wits? That happens to me quite often. Okay, I still have some lingering effects from some things that happened in my life that I jump very easily. We've had to train our grandchildren, don't come up behind Papa too fast, because he might deck you. But it's just, that's the idea of being scared out of your wits. And as a matter of fact, it's an interesting word. It's only used 3 times in our New Testament. One other place it's used is over in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, where Paul is speaking to the believers there, and he says, not to be quickly shaken in mind or alarmed. That word alarmed is the same word that's translated frightened in the New American Standard over in verse 6 of Matthew 24. And Paul's speaking about this letter that was circulating at this time. Don't be scared out of your wits by this letter because it's nonsense, is what Paul says. Okay, so Christ is telling his disciples these things are going to happen, but don't worry about it. It's got to happen. It's got to happen. So let's go over back to Revelation, and let's look at the second writer. Excuse me. Boy, it sure was a good dinner, wasn't it? I had too much. But then I was warned about that. The second seal is in Revelation 6, verses 3 and 4. It's the rider on the red horse. The rider on the red horse. And once again, keep in mind, this scroll is being opened by Christ himself to release or to unleash these events on the earth. So someone want to read verses 3 and 4 from Revelation chapter 6.
And the Lamb opened the second seal. I heard the second living creature say, "Come." And then another horse came out, a fiery red one. Its rider was given power to take peace from the earth and to make men slay each other. To him was given a large sword.
Okay, very descriptive of a warrior. Okay, this red horse that comes on the scene carries a rider who has in his hand a sword to conquer. Okay, now what did the white horse bring? Peace. What's the red horse bringing? War. He has the ability to take peace from the earth. And it's worldwide warfare. We just don't look at it as just happening over in the Middle East. This is worldwide. This is worldwide. And in your Bible, over back in Matthew 24 in verse 7, we hear of nations rising against nations and kingdoms against kingdom. The idea behind those two words, nations and kingdom, I've tried to describe as best as I could. Nations are just that, okay? Canada, Mexico, Spain, those nations. But then there are kingdoms also. Kingdoms would be like the European Union, is, for better or worse, it's like a kingdom. I think about the Warsaw Pact, okay? That's the Russian communist nations that are in alliance with each other as a kingdom. I mean, let's face it, they act as one. Okay, that's the idea behind this. So there are nations that are going to be warring, and there are going to be kingdoms that are going to be warring, and this is all taking place. Again, I'm sounding like a broken record during the first 3.5 years of the tribulation. Back to Revelation chapter 6. The third rider is going to be released. And this third rider is going to be on a black horse. And once again, it's our Lord that's going to open up the seal that will release the black horse. So someone read verses 5 and 6 of Revelation chapter 6.
When the Lamb opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a black horse. Its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand. Then I heard what sounded like a voice among the 4 living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a day's wages, and 3 quarts of barley for a day's wages, and do not damage the oil and the wine."
Okay. The black horse comes on the scene, and what is the black horse going to bring? Famine. Economic ruin through the world. Okay? Economic ruin through the world. Now, think of when there's wars happening, is there a lot of farming going on at the same time?
No.
Not necessarily, right? I mean, it just doesn't take place. So there's going to be famines going. Whatever there was before the war started is basically all there is until another planting season can come. But that planting season isn't going to come anytime soon. So there are going to be famines in this world unlike anything we've ever seen. We've always we've seen the famines in especially in Africa or other places around the world where thousands of people are dying of starvation. That pales, and I hate to say it because I don't want to say that they're that not only did it happen, but that it wasn't something that was something that we shouldn't be concerned about. But these famines that are coming during the first 3.5 years, the magnitude, actually, I don't think we can comprehend the magnitude. You have to think about this. This is a world type war, and not like World War I or like World War II even. It's far greater than that because every continent in this of this planet are going to be under some kind of warfare. And because of that warfare, famine is going to break out. Famine is going to break out. And I think that kind of goes along with verses 6 and 7 there, that we're going to hear of these wars and rumors of wars, and then all these other things are going to take place. Notice towards the end of verse 7 of Matthew 24, Christ says that in various places there will be famines. There will be famines. So they are everywhere. They are everywhere. Now, I know this is in your handout, and we don't necessarily need to look at it, but just keep in mind that chart that I gave you comparing Matthew 24 with Revelation 6. Okay, they line up perfectly, I think. The seal judgments and what's taking place in verses 4 through 14, I think, mesh perfectly. They mesh perfectly. Okay, so let's look at another seal. What comes next? Seal number 4. Seal number 4. Someone want to read for us verses 7 and 8 from Revelation chapter 6.
When he opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature saying, "Come and see." So I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and the name of him who sat on it was Death, and Hades followed with him, and power was given to them over a fourth of the earth, to kill with sword, with hunger, with death, and by the beasts of the earth.
Okay, so now Christ releases, by breaking the fourth seal, he releases the fourth rider. And that rider is going to be on a pale horse, right? It's going to be on a pale horse. So does that mean Clint Eastwood is the pale rider? There's something to keep you folks awake. I know if you're, I'm dying up here. I know it's got to be just as hot out there. Okay, but good grief! I hope Clint Eastwood. I like Clint Eastwood. So, anyways, okay, let's get back to serious stuff. Okay, got to break it up here a little bit. Okay, the pale, or some translations say ashen rider. Is the rider of death. And look what he's bringing with him. It says that Hades follows him. And, we studied Hades in detail several months back. And, it's almost as if Hades is following him and symbolically with its mouth open, ready to gobble up all these people that are going to be dying and dying without Christ. Okay, that's, I think, the idea behind Hades following him. Notice that this rider, rider on the pale horse, is going to be given the ability to take life of a quarter of the population of the world. Okay, the population of the earth right now is getting real close to 8 billion. 8 billion. So let's just hold that figure. Okay. Now, I know, the rapture is going to take place and there's going to be lots of people gone. So, but I'm just saying, just for numbers, let's say there's 8 billion. That means that this rider, the rider on the pale horse, will kill, by different means, 2 billion people. 2 billion people. We don't comprehend that. We really don't. I mean, there's no way that we can comprehend that. think about it in this room. Every fourth person is dead. Every fourth person in this room is dead. Okay, that's how many people are going to be killed. And the thing that's interesting, I mentioned this a few weeks ago. In chapter 6 of Revelation, a quarter of the population of the world is killed. When you get to Revelation chapter 9, a third of what's left is going to be killed. So there's death on an incomprehensible. We can't wrap our minds around it. We really can't. And notice how it's going to be done with the sword, okay, warfare, with famine, which we've already seen, pestilence. That idea of pestilence is just all. We think COVID's bad or whatever, or the flu or whatever. It's kind of like on the range of the dynamics of the bubonic plague that swept through Europe in the Middle Ages. From my reading, 25 to 30% of the entire population of Europe died during the bubonic plague. That's how bad it was. Okay, so that's pestilence. Wild animal. It's interesting that it mentions wild animals. It's almost as if the animal kingdom is going to be turned on its head, if we could say that. In other words, there won't be the fear that there is right now. Okay, you come across a wild animal in the forest or in the jungle, and most of the times they're going to turn tail and run. Okay, now I'm saying most times. Yeah, I know they attack people and lions kill people and all that, but it's not like it will be during this point in time. We're all the wild animals, You're going to get attacked by squirrels even. It's just going to happen. The animal kingdom is going to turn on mankind. And that will be used by this rider on the pale horse to inflict injury and to kill multiple people. Okay? So, 4 riders.
It's interesting the bubonic plague was brought by rats.
Yes, it was. Yes, the fleas that were on the rats is what caused it. So we've looked at these first 4 sealed judgments. Okay, and this is a quote from John MacArthur's New Testament commentary on this section. And look what he has to say. He says, the world has witnessed many earthquakes, famines, plagues, and even some heavenly signs, but those will be nothing compared to the calamities of the end times. They will occur in various places, and here's the kicker, they're going to appear simultaneously. So we have, when we read through Revelation 6 and we think, this takes place, oh, that's done. And then this takes place, that's done. And then this takes place. It's all happening at the same time. That's the idea behind the language there. And you'll see this in a moment over in Matthew 24. It's all taking place at the same time. It's like I said, it's hard for us to comprehend this. I don't know if you can think back, and most of us are well aware of what took place on 9/11 back in 2001. That was catastrophic. And if you were paying attention that morning when it happened, wasn't it one thing after another? You didn't know what was coming next. We were living in Arizona at the time. Interesting fact, Jane was in Germany visiting relatives on 9/11. Okay? I was home, and my daughter, who was about 19 at the time, was home. And I was actually on a field trip to a big transmission station down there, Tombstone, Arizona. And we had no cell connection. And so the first I heard was just before we lost our cell connection, I got a call from my daughter, who was in tears saying, did you see what's happening at the World Trade Centers? And I'm trying to calm her down. No, I didn't see anything. We didn't know anything was happening. And we didn't know anything was happening till we actually left the where we were at and were able to get some reports. But it was, there was the hijackings, and then they were crashing them into those towers. But at the same time, they were crashing them into the Pentagon, weren't they? And then at the same time, they had another flight, and from what I've read about it, that flight was turning around to come back to Washington, D.C. Whether it was going to hit the Capitol or the White House, we'll never know. But that was so it was like one thing after another after another. And then by the end of the day, there was still more. Not only was all this mayhem happening, but those towers came down. And then after that, there was flights. You can't fly anywhere in the world. You are stuck where you're at, and you're not getting home at least on a plane. I mean, and that's one incident. Now multiply that times 1,000,000, and that's what's happening during these first 3.5 years, as MacArthur brings out here. Okay, it's happening in various places, and it's happening all at one time. It's hard to fathom, isn't it? Seal number 6. Seal number 6. Go to Revelation 6 again. We're going to try and get through these seals at least tonight. The 5th seal is going to be open, and with the opening of the 5th seal, we're going to learn about the martyrs that are going to be, there's going to be so much martyrdom during the first 3.5 years, and also moving into the second 3.5 years. But we're concentrating on the first 3 right now. So can I get someone to read Revelation chapter 6, verses 9 through 11?
Then he opened the 5th seal. I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and the testimony that they maintained. They called out in a loud voice, "How long, sovereign Lord, holy and true, until you judge the inhabitants of the earth and avenge our blood?" Then each of them was given a white robe, and they were told to wait a little longer until the number of their fellow servants and brothers who were to be killed as they had been was completed.
Okay, so this is the 5th seal. Christ is opening up the 5th seal. And the interesting thing about the 5th seal is that towards the end of this passage that was just read, he tells them just wait a little bit longer because there are more martyrs coming. There are more martyrs coming. Okay, so these are the martyrs that are under the altar, it says. And, we're talking here probably figurative language. So, and I don't want to get into that at this point, but we know that there's going to be martyrdom taking place. It matches up with verses 9 through 13 of Matthew chapter 24 that we're going to look at here shortly. So we have untold numbers of believers that are going to be killed during the whole tribulation. But specifically, we're looking at the first 3.5 years. And during those first 3.5 years, they're waiting for the Lord to basically to avenge them.
You say believers are going to be killed?
Yes. Yeah, they're going to be martyred.
During the tribulation.
Yes. Okay. So there are believers that are going to be.
The church is already gone.
Oh, excuse me. Well, let me rephrase that. Tribulation saints.
Okay.
Tribulation saints. Okay. Thank you for clarifying, helping me clarify. Tribulation saints are going to be martyred during this time, and we don't know how many they're going to be martyred, but it's a big amount, I'm sure. Okay. They're going to be martyred, and Christ, tells them it's going to happen. There will be justice. It will take place. Just chill. Okay. Just chill. But we need to. I want to spend a park here on verse 9 for just a few minutes, because there's some things I want you to see in verse 9, and we'll probably end with this for tonight. So we've gone through the 4 the four horsemen of the apocalypse. We're in seal number 5, dealing with the martyrdom. And in verse 9 of Matthew 24, look what the Lord says. He says, "Then they will deliver you to tribulation and will kill you, and you will be hated by all nations because of my name." There's a few words that I want to kind of highlight here in this verse because I think they're important. I think the most important word is the first word. I think most translations say "then." Is that correct? Okay. That word "then" is not the word that we use for "then." You know, I'm going to go to the store, and then I'm going to go get gas, and then after that, I'm going to the transfer station, and then after that, I'm going to go home. Okay. It's a sequence of events. Okay. Matthew uses this word "then" 90 times. 90 times, more than all the other writers of our New Testament together. Okay, he uses this word, and this word is actually a word that means the action is happening simultaneously. So when we read, "Then they will deliver you," it's then they will deliver you at the same time that what are we looking at here? That there's going to be false messiahs, that there's going to be wars, that there's going to be kingdom against kingdom, there's going to be famines. It's simultaneously. It's all happening at the same time. That's what that word "then" signifies. So it's important. I mean, in English, we just read and say, "Well, then after these things up to verse 8, then this happens." No. This is happening at the same time. I can't emphasize that enough because it's all taking place during these first 3.5 years. The next word is actually, it's the very next word, "they." And that word "they" that's used, I think maybe my battery's starting to go bad, huh? Let's see. Bear with me, folks.
Can I ask a question here, Bob?
Might as well, because I'm not doing anything.
Is this happening all over the world or just in Israel?
This is happening, I believe, all over the world. The focus has to be Israel, but I think it's worldwide. Okay, the horsemen are worldwide, I believe. To concentrate them just on the Middle East, I think, really, I don't think does justice to the total impact of what those horsemen are bringing. Okay, but "they" refers to those in verse 10 of Matthew 24, where it says, "At this time, many will fall away and will betray one another and hate one another." Okay, that's the "they." Okay, their actions are going to be dealt with. That's going to happen at the end of chapter 25 when we get to the sheep and the goat judgment. But that's going to happen eventually. Okay, so we have "then," we have "they." We then have this word "deliver," and this is the same word that's used of Judas when he betrayed Christ in Matthew 26. Okay, same word. So this future betrayal is going to be shocking, as I put up on the board there, and it's going to happen suddenly. Okay, the remnant of Jews that are left are going to be totally blown away by the way things are going to transpire, because it says that they are going to deliver you up to tribulation. They're going to turn you over to the authorities. They're going to kill you. It says they're going to, and you're going to be hated by all nations. Why? Because of my name. You know, it's interesting. Jane and I just watched some history on the history of Eastern Europe. It was really interesting. And when it got into the modern times, when the communists took over, one thing that really came out that just startled me, maybe that's the wrong word, it just kind of like opened my eyes, was that in East Germany when it was communist, especially in the Berlin area, of course, and actually through all of Eastern Germany, there was the secret police known as the Stasi were the ones that actually were responsible for spying on everyone, on everyone. And the figures that came out of this documentary we were watching is that 1 out of every 4 people were spying on someone. Okay? Kids against the parents, uncles against nephews, neighbors against neighbors. I mean, the Stasi had so much fear and held the country in such a grip that you were afraid to talk to anyone about anything because there was so much spying that was going on during this time. They actually came up with a figure. They said that the files that they collected, if you put them together, one file after the other, would stretch for 26 miles. Now, today, the Stasi headquarters in Berlin is a museum. You can actually go there, and you can actually go there and find out who was spying on you during this time frame if you want to. It's just an interesting thing. But that's nothing compared to what's going to be happening, because not only are they going to be turning people over, but people are going to be killed because of it. You know, we look at World War II, when we look at the German the SS and how they controlled the people into spying on, especially in trying to find Jews anywhere they could find them, and it's interesting because the ones that remained faithful, the Jews that remained faithful, were usually taken care of by Gentiles, okay? And we're going to see that during this time period, and we'll talk about that a little bit more next time we get together. Let me end with this for tonight, okay? Again, Matthew 24, verse 29, notice it says that this is going to be a worldwide persecution, okay? Now, all nations means all nations, okay? You can't get around that, okay? It's all nations. But what about the United States? We don't even know if there'll be a United States, you know, and I don't say that flippantly. I'm just saying, you know, that's all nations means they're all going to be after the Jews at this time, and I think because of that, in the 5th seal we see so many martyrs, because there's going to be betrayal, and there's going to be persecution, and there's going to be killing of the remnant of believing Jews, and also other tribulation saints at this time. Okay?
2/3 of the Jews will die in Israel.
Pardon me?
2/3 of the Jews in Israel will die.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah, Zechariah tells us that 2/3 of the Jews in Israel will perish. Okay, that's believing and unbelieving. But just keep that number in mind. Right now, I think the population in Israel's 10, 11 million, something like that. If I got my numbers right. Anyways, we'll pick up here next week, and we'll try and wrap up this section on the first half of the tribulation, and then actually we're going to spend probably the week after that. We're going to spend. So I'll have to make sure I let Wayne know about this. We'll probably spend that week talking about 2 theological problems that come up in verses 13 and 14. And we'll discuss that in our last class.